Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and a huge thank you to the Standards Bank Know the Threat team for organizing this event. It's very, very timely. As you probably all are aware, there's a global trend. The numbers are going up in terms of the cyber threats and the attacks, the variety of it, as we can see. We also see moving from human attacks, purely human, to now the use of artificial intelligence, which means scalability will be a huge factor going forward. But thank you so very much for inviting me to speak to this short session. My name is Odusami. I'm the CEO of MAXUT Consulting Limited. We're based in Lagos, and we also operate from the US as well. We have people out in California and New York working with us. We provide cybersecurity solutions to most of the financial services sector. As you all know, that's where the money is at, so we have to protect it. So we work with a lot of the banks and their subsidiaries across the continent. We work across these areas, mobile banking security, electronic transaction, and identity management, and so on, and also privilege access management with our customers. OneSpan is been a long-term partner for us. We use a lot of technology. We understand the technology very well. We create our own little solutions around them. We provide systems integration to a lot of the key applications that the financial services sector use. So let's talk about what's happening in our environment, in our continent, with regards to cyber attacks. Constantly growing numbers. As you can tell, these numbers here are a part of a global trend. I just highlighted the situation from a news article not too long ago with Nigeria, 175 or 174% increase, in Kenya 438. Similar numbers exist in South Africa and other parts of the continent. Again, this is a global trend. It's increasing, and like I mentioned earlier, is going to get worse with the use of artificial intelligence when we now go beyond human actually taking actions. Some of the examples here cover a variety of the different fraud that we see. The first one with the Union 54 bank is a fintech, a new fintech that provides API. So this is actually an API security fraud that happened where they tried to create a lot of chargeback for a lot of millions, 1.7 million here, to being transferred to other customers, and they had to quickly shut down their operations to recoup that money. The other example is Flutterwave, is Unicorn, $1 valuation organizations that had almost $5 million being transferred from the accounts to thousands of different accounts in the banks, and they had to go through the courts and so on to stop some of those accounts from taking those money walking through the bank. So again, there's a danger. There's also a trend that the fintech being relatively new, security might not necessarily be the top on their radar. But they're learning, of course, the hard way in some instances that security has to be the watchword. Some of the traditional banks are obviously experienced. They put a lot of infrastructure in place. MTN, as you're all familiar with, a continent-wide telco. They have what they call a mobile money license to provide mobile banking to their agencies. They went live in Nigeria, and within less than a week or so, they were hacked for millions, and they had to roll back that services for a while they retool and provide the necessary security. So it varies a lot of the fraud that we see, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the techniques and the risk that we face that is kind of very peculiar to us across Africa. One of the biggest one, and probably the most difficult to track, is what we see is internal collusion. This is where current employees or ex-employees that understand and know the internal systems very well collude to perpetrate fraud. In some instances, it's actually across agencies. We have people, dealing with the telcos and the bank staff coming together to see what they can do, to see where there are cracks or loopholes in the system. Social engineering, a very big one in terms of volume, as well as cost, the value of money that we lose. Across the continent, we have a very large population, elderly population, people that are not very tech savvy, people that are not very literate, and social engineering is where they try to make them do what they wouldn't normally do. Either they call them to collect a PIN number, or call them to, or send a link to somebody, or even in WhatsApp group, they send a link or via email, and people click on it, and from there it's a downward spiral. SIM card fraud, very, very prevalent still in Nigeria, especially, and I'm sure across the continent, because it's a very cheap and fast way to reach customers when you want to send them a one-time password to their phone. You don't need a smartphone, you don't need any sophisticated phone to get an SMS message. But what we found is, people actually an individual swap their SIM card so that they don't receive any messages, and all the messages get redirected to the fraudsters, the OTPs, and so on. This was so prevalent to the point where in Nigeria now there's actually a regulation that says you cannot do transaction above a certain amount and authenticate customers with OTP sent by SMS. A very peculiar situation for us also is the very competitive nature of the industry, especially the banking sector that we work with. New services are being rolled out. The fintechs are constantly bringing out innovative services that the bank have to match. And with that comes, the technology that needs to support it. Now, do we have the expertise? Do we have those technologies well tested before we roll it out? That's something that we see. The other part of this is the loss of the skill gap that we face. We've had a situation where, almost an entire department, emigrates, they leave the bank. Our young people, well-educated, experienced guys are leaving for what they call greener pastures abroad, UK, Canada, the US, and so on. So that's creating a lot of gaps and issues for the banks that we work with, or the organization that we work with, to try and quickly fill those skills, or they have to use our source skills, which of course introduces another risk to their system. Third-party risk, pretty normal. We use cloud providers. Some of the popular ones like AWS and maybe Microsoft Azure, probably, they use global best practices for security. So, but we also have our local providers that, you need to also make sure that they meet those global standards if you have to use a cloud provider. So there's potential risk there if the necessary due diligence is not done. Open banking, banking API, we're beginning to see introduction of the PSD2 API banking, open banking standards in Nigeria. For example, there was this recent framework released where a lot of the banks have to share information with third-party providers using API. That potentially also could introduce a new risk to the system. We have the retail fraudsters. These are what we call the Yahoo boys. These are guys that just sit down all day and send out thousands of emails to people around the world, and hoping that just a few of them will bite, and that's what they really need. So under that, you have the vacation scam, where they send you too good to be true vacation packages or airline fare, and people just click on those, and there you go. And it's also the business email compromise, where the business or the accounting department will get an email saying that it's coming from the CEO or from somebody within the organizations. It looks genuine, it looks true, and it is transfer or make payment into the fraudsters' account. And we have the traditional kind of technology-focused risk, the hackers that hack into the applications and so on, the malware. That is very prevalent, especially in the mobile space these days, the ransomware, and the other risk, and the use of AI that I mentioned, which is just beginning to creep into the conversation these days. Lastly, for us, a very peculiar situation is the affordability of all the countermeasures. They're pretty expensive. Most of this technology come from abroad. We have to pay in US dollars, as you all know. So we tend to come in and see what we can do to use our local expertise, local skills and personnel to address this gap and enhance some of the technologies that we deliver to the customers. A good example of an awareness campaign by one of the banks, Zenith Bank in Nigeria, is actually one of our customers. Like I mentioned, social engineering is one of the biggest sources of the fraud. So there's a constant awareness education going around by the bank. So usually most of the Sunday newspapers will have many of these being advertised. Don't give your PIN to anyone. We'll never call you to collect your PIN from you, and so on and so forth. If we send you an email, if you're not sure, go to our website and actually go in there rather than go clicking on a link. Some of the statistics that we also use in our conversation, this is a report generated quarterly by Nigerian Interbank Settlement System, which is a consortium of banks and the CBN. It's an independent organization, but it tracks a lot of these fraud statistics across the country. This is shared to a few select people so you can see what the trends are, what is going on, and so that you can put in the necessary countermeasure. So for a lot of the policy makers in the financial sector, this is a very important report that they get every quarter to see what's going on. Just to delve a little bit into the internal, some of the factors, internal collusion, I kind of highlighted a few of them again, just to talk about it. If you're in a situation where you have to make decisions around this, be very aware, ex-employees, have they been removed from the system? They've been using the proper way to make sure that when people leave the organization, they don't have access. But in some situations, it's actually collusion with existing trusted users. Again, you need to make sure you have the necessary countermeasure. Privileged access management is one example of technology that we give to our customers to manage some of these internal issues here. In one of the instances that we had to deal with, they took a long time to look at, to surveil accounts that were dormant, and then they moved money from those accounts. Again, it might not apply to you if you're not a bank, but very important to be aware of the risk. Some of the regulatory response, I'll just quickly touch on those. A big part is now the information sharing by the organizations. In the fintech, in the Flutterwave fraud instance, that kind of triggered a lot of conversation within the fintech community, and they're all coming together to find a way to share information. I believe the banks already have the system in place as well, but we do know that there are drawbacks. Some people do not feel comfortable disclosing the information. Some banks are too embarrassed to show what is going on, but the whole idea of this was to make sure that, a fraudster cannot go from one institution to the other to perpetrate the same fraud if they can be identified earlier in the cycle. The new frameworks, we have a cybersecurity framework. There's some mandatory requirements now in the banking sector. For example, there's a need to also to make sure you have a chief information security officer. It's a mandated role, and the functions of that role are well defined. There's a data protection officer. This is for the privacy compliance regulation that we have, and I'm sure the similar exists in other countries across the continent. They're buttressing the KYC policy so that before somebody opens an account, at least we can identify him positively using some of the existing infrastructure like the national ID card, which is now compulsory. Before you can get a phone in Nigeria now, you need to have the NIN number to get a phone number. So, and then there's also the BVN, which is a way to track the owners of accounts with the bank. SIM recycling has been very a good measure. I mentioned SIM swap earlier. The idea of this is that if anything changes about the ownership or phone number of a SIM card changes, they're able to detect it, and then they can apply some policies in terms of what transactions can be performed within a certain time until, because what happens usually with SIM swap is usually very short, very temporary. Maybe the owner of that account is no longer in the country or is in a situation where he can't receive messages anymore, and they take advantage of it. We also begin to see data protection regulation being enforced, i.e. the privacy of individuals. You cannot share information. You have to manage people's information responsibly. Most of the regulations in Africa, of course, are built around similar to the European Union GDPR, which has been in existence now for about 3 or 4 years. I mentioned the quarterly reports, similar to what I showed you earlier by NIBS, where people are encouraged to report frauds when they are confirmed, so that we can share that information and leverage that intelligence across the industry. A few examples here of preventive measures. These are advisories that are given to medium-sized organizations. This particular one is actually part of the NIBS report. Basically just a way for people to be aware of things that are useful. The basic cybersecurity hygiene that needs to be applied. The second example here is from a UK governance information agency that actually issued this for medium and large organizations. Again, these are 10 steps. They're not by no means exhaustive, but if you're a policymaker or you're in charge of buttressing the cybersecurity posture of your organization, and these are quite basic hygiene that you should take a look into. And lastly, just to talk about what we do, we work a lot on the two-factor authentication, what we call multi-factor authentication with our customers. Basically, we're going beyond a one-time password, which is the where you key in a number. We're beginning to go into things like transaction signing, transaction approval, for the large high-value customers. So we're going beyond the basic 2FA. We're also protecting a mobile application with a shielding software, and then integration, because one of the things we bring to the table is an understanding of the processes, the banking processes, and the people around an organization, that we try to tailor the solution to match their existing process or to improve it where necessary. So that's what we do. A few of our customers are shown here. Hopefully some of them are familiar to you. Most of them are subsidiaries across the continent. Thank you very much. Hopefully you found this insightful and useful. If there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to the Standards Bank team to reach out to me if you need to. Any questions. Thank you so much.